Hello everyone, this is part 17 of What If Naruto Was Neglected and Was Trained by Shisui, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. I'll kill you all. You bastards. Hidan yelled, his head bouncing around as it hung from a long rope from the ceiling. Letting himself hang as 3 chains anchored themselves into the ground, making his head stable as it thrashed around in his dark prison cell. I'll rip your heads off. He yelled again, thrashing around as he attempted to bite the chains holding him. Hoping for a feeble escape as he seethed in anger. This had never happened before, he had never been forced into submission by anyone before. Not even Kakazu could contain the Jashin worshipper no matter how hard he tried. But this was just embarrassing and demeaning. He didn't even have his body anymore, or his trusty scythe. He swore the second he escaped out of here he would hunt down those 2 stupid girls that did this to him and mutilate them. Cut them up into tiny little pieces and make sure Jashin-sama was pleased with his sacrifice, even if that meant cutting up his own body in the process. Jashin-sama will not rest until you all die. Geez, you're so loud, can't you cool it for 1 second? Hidan stopped his screeching as a mysterious voice echoed itself in the dark room. The Akatsuki member felt his blood boil just thinking about who was here to see him. He followed the sound of the voice to see a tall silhouette standing right behind his prison cell, his arm through one of the bars as he put his hand to his cheek, a large grin playing across his darkened face making Hidan even more furious. Hidan scoffed loudly, almost foaming at the mouth as his grey eyes flared to life in pure adulterated animosity. And who the yo? Please, I said, can you stop? The voice said again, his voice dropping with amusement as he cut Hidan off mid-speech. The grey-haired Akatsuki member felt his eyes go wide as he felt a hand grip his mouth shut. Looking down to see that the man was now inside his cell with his palm flat against his mouth making him go dead silent. He followed the arm of his visitor with his eyes to finally get a good glimpse of the man, his shining blue eyes almost seemed to illuminate the room with its bright nature. Spiky blonde hair that seemed to defy the laws of gravity as he brought his free hand up to his mouth, closing it into a fist as he placed his index finger over his mouth covering his grin. Now can you please be quiet? I promise I'll make it worth your while. The man said, closing his eyes as he smiled wide. Hidan scoffed into the man's palm. His eyes narrowing dangerously as he tried to scream again, only for it to come out muffled as he thrashed around roughly, making the blonde visitor just keep his smile up as he waited for the man to finish. Hidan, noticing that his attempts weren't getting him any more, finally eased up. Stopping his thrashing as he glared at the blonde. Brooding, he slowly nodded his head pushing down his anger at the man's smile. The blonde nodded in satisfaction at seeing the man comply, slowly removing his hand from the grey-headed man's mouth, waiting for a moment to see if he would start his yelling again. Happy to see that Hidan wasn't going to be screaming again, he nodded his head again happily. So, you're willing to hear me out, huh? Hidan glared, clicking his tongue in his mouth as he bit his cheek, drawing a small drop of blood to fall down to his chin. Hidan's eyes glowed dangerously, rethinking his decision entirely as he stared deeply into the man's wry expression. Sadly for him, he didn't really have much of a choice in the matter. Whoever this blonde was, he seemed to know exactly what he was doing, like he was following a plan. Hidan could fight back, but in his condition it would get him nowhere and probably make his stay here in Konoha much worse than it already was. He already had several interrogation people come to see him and they were just plain annoying. Since pain didn't really affect him, their plans were more or less worthless. Hidan just scoffed again, anger bubbling in him even more than usually. What the do you want, blondie? The blonde smiled again, taking a step back from the head as he skipped around the room happily. Hidan watched with annoyance as the blonde disappeared from his peripheral vision and walked behind him. The blonde's voice was oozing with confidence and arrogance as he spoke. Well, I have a little proposition with you, Hidan. The blonde said happily, almost singing his words as he pushed his face next to Hidan's, getting way too close to the severed head. Hidan squirmed at the closeness, anger once again seething within him as he could barely see the blonde. What if I could promise you anything you wanted? Like, let's say, he whispered, getting close to Hidan's ear, making the Akatsuki member shudder at the sensation, the promise to kill anyone that you wanted, with no drawbacks. That piqued Hidan's interest. He felt his eyebrow raise upwards, turning his head as much as he could to meet the sapphire blue eyes looking at him with promise. Jashin-sama would in fact like that. His whole life has been devoted to the god after all. What do you mean? Hidan asked, losing his snarky tone and replaced it with pure curiosity. I have a dream, Hidan. I've had this dream for a couple of years now. The blonde said, moving away from the Akatsuki member as he walked around to the front of the head again. With his back to Hidan, he raised his both arms outwards, his eyes shut as Hidan looked at him quizzically. To create a world where people who needed a home could go and live peacefully. And this plan involves you, Hidan. If you agree to help me, then I could make your dream become real. The blonde said, keeping his arms outstretched as he snapped his fingers. The snap echoed in the dark room for a moment, and Hidan widened his eyes as the room around them started to change slowly. He blinked in surprise as the dark prison cell disappeared completely. Now they were both standing in an open field looking down at a peaceful village from a tall mountain. Hidan looked on in awe at the scenic view, feeling the soft breeze gently tickle his face as he raised one of his arms and brushed it across his face. Hidan shrieked and looked at his arm in shock. His eyes went wide as dinner plates as he ran his now fixed arms across his reformed body. Hidan snapped his head over to the blonde, watching his yellow locks sway in the wind with a peaceful expression on his face. If you agree to help me, I will promise you a new body. And allow you to live out your own dream to dedicate your life to Jashin-sama. You would have authority to kill anyone outside of a select group, in any way you see fit. So Hidan, the blonde said, lowering his arms and turning around to meet Hidan's conflicted expression. What will it be? Hidan froze at the blonde words, looking down and moving his feet in the soft blades of grass beneath his feet. It was a strange situation he found himself in. Even though the blonde's words were vague, Hidan found himself entranced and hanging on to each word as he spoke to him. Completely enthralled, Hidan felt something in his body wanting to accept the offer. He didn't know what he had to do, but it couldn't be worse than what he had already done with the Akatsuki. And it wasn't like he cared about the group. He was only in the organization to kill for Jashin-sama. Hidan felt himself start to smirk as he looked across the scenery. He didn't give a rat's ass about the blonde's dream. Honestly, he didn't even care what all of this meant. But it was enticing. The blonde was making it seem intoxicating. What would you need me to do? The blonde just grinned. To-san, you have to hear me out. Natsu, I've told you already. This all just seems a little ridiculous. Minato, Namikaze said, sighing as he ran a hand through his blonde hair. Natsu, on the other hand, was beginning to get irritated. He groaned loudly and tightened his arms around the hospital file he was holding, clutching it tight to his body. After his father returned from helping Narumi with the Akatsuki members, Natsu wanted to talk to him immediately, but Minato had put it off until the next day, saying he had important things to worry about regarding the Akatsuki and what their plans were for the severed head of Hidan, and hasn't had time for anything else. Natsu wasn't even sure if Minato had gone to see Naruto since he got back, which was more than odd considering Minato always seemed to brood whenever Naruto was brought up. And honestly, it was starting to piss Natsu off more than anything. Something was up with Naruto. Natsu couldn't place it exactly, but he could tell. In the past he was always able to read Naruto like a book. It was easy to tell what he was thinking and bank off of it. But now he was more closed, more aloof and shielded off. Natsu, no matter how hard he tried, he just couldn't get their talk out of his head. And that's what led Natsu to his father's office the first thing in the morning. Natsu had not slept at all last night in anticipation. He stalked outside of Naruto's hospital room for a few hours before returning home deep into the night after realizing his brother was in fact fast asleep. He waited anxiously for the sun to rise and set off immediately to the Hokage Tower the second he saw the all too familiar yellow flash of his father light up through the window. But now, Minato was pissing him off. Natsu growled, stalking closer to his father's desk. To-san, look, I even have proof. Natsu, stop. Minato yelped, cutting off his son. Natsu felt his eyes go wide in shock at his father's outburst as the blonde Kage stood up abruptly in his seat, looking at Natsu with a slightly annoyed expression. Naruto isn't up to anything. As you know, he was left severely injured and on the brink of death. It's even a miracle that he's still alive and you're coming at me, trying to accuse your own brother of scheming something. Minato asked incredulously, giving his son an annoyed look making Natsu scowl. I'm incredibly busy, Natsu. I'm trying to see if there is anything I can do to help Naruto so he could stay in the village. The council is already breathing down my neck in regards to Naruto, and we just took down 2 Akatsuki members, with one being headless and currently kept captive in a holding cell. I know you always had a grudge against Naruto for some reason, but this isn't time for such childlike pettiness. Minato yelled, making Natsu take a step back in slight shock. Minato himself felt sorry as soon as the words left his mouth. He has been under a lot of stress since he returned from helping Kurenai with Kakaza, with the council and his son returning. He could already feel some of his hair turning gray from the stress, and with Natsu acting the way that he was, it was making things a lot more chaotic. Oh yeah. Childlike pettiness. Then explain this. Natsu scoffed, slamming his hospital file onto his father's desk with barely contained rage, making Minato narrow his eyes at his son's sudden rudeness. He opened his mouth to scold his son for using such language but couldn't get the words out in time when Natsu flipped open the file roughly, making the pages flutter from the force. Natsu pointed to the file, drawing Minato's attention as the cage looked down. This is Naruto's hospital file. I was the one looking after him when he got back. From what I was told, and from what I have seen, Naruto has lost almost 2 gallons of blood over these past few weeks. And that's not even counting the 5 months he has been unconscious. Natsu scowled out, making sure his father was listening before flipping the page again angrily. Minato blinked at that info. Surely someone losing that much blood would have already died from blood loss long ago. He drew his attention to the spot Natsu was tapping with his finger impatiently. As I was checking him over, I found these. Naruto has been walking around with 3 heavily concealed seals on his body. One of them was a weight seal. That wasn't too surprising to see, but this was. Natsu said, moving his finger upwards to show the picture Natsu had taken when Naruto was unconscious. This seal was resting just above his eyelid. It was almost impossible to see, and I stumbled across it by sheer dumb luck. This seal is blocking any access to his eyes and nervous system. Half of these arrays I can't even decipher myself. That drew Minato's attention. He sat back down into his chair and grabbed the file from the desk. After a small once over, he nodded his head. Yes, you're right. It seems this seal is rather intricate since it also has a bunch of defense seals placed around it. Minato mused aloud, looking back to his son with a raised brow. But this doesn't mean that Naruto is up to something. No, but it does mean he's hiding something. And we haven't even scraped the surface. Natsu responded bitterly, making Minato frown. His son did have a point. Natsu asked his father to turn the page over. Minto agreed, turning it over to see an even larger picture of a seal placed neatly on his youngest son's stomach, and Minato felt his heart drop in his chest. Then what do you have to say about this then? Doesn't this seal remind you of anything, Hokage-sama? Natsu vocalized, his voice oozing with his own annoyance at his father for still feigning ignorance to the signs placed in front of him. Minato on the other hand felt his hand go numb, barely catching the paper as it slipped in his grasp. His mouth went completely dry and he was sure his heart had stopped beating for several seconds. With a frightened expression he snapped his head over to Natsu's, gulping slightly. Is this real? As real as it gets. Minato gulped again, staring down at the abundance of sealing arrays on his youngest son's chest. Minato didn't even know what he should be feeling at this moment. He couldn't pinpoint a singular emotion as it tore itself all throughout his body. But this doesn't make any sense. This looks almost identical to the seal holding the Kyuubi at bay. There's even an array for chakra concealing, and even tenketsu concealing and array concealing. Minato said, leaning back into his chair with a disturbed look on his face. His mind was in the middle of running a marathon and he couldn't even think straight anymore. This was the last thing he expected when Naruto returned from wherever he went after abandoning the village. It just didn't make any sense. It was almost impossible for his son to have a seal holding a Beiyu at bay on him. Minato knew for a fact that he didn't seal any of the Kyuubi's chakra within Naruto. But what was even more horrifying was if Naruto was holding a Beiyu, just how did it happen? A Bayu couldn't be sealed into someone over the age of 12, since their chakra was officially done maturing at that age, and if you tried to seal the demon away, the host would most likely die from either chakra poisoning, or a chakra overload. And not to mention that demonic chakra was already like a poison. If not sealed correctly, the chakra could easily burn away the chakra coils and make it impossible to mold chakra altogether. Then that only meant that Naruto, if he was truly holding a Bayu at bay, then it had to be sealed in him when he was still a young child. Minato physically shuddered at that thought. Then did something infiltrate the village without his knowledge and seal a Bayu in Naruto? Or did Naruto get taken away from Konoha and that's where the sealing was done? Minato already hated himself enough for not being there for his son, but this was like the cherry on top for being the worst father he ever could have imagined him being. How could he not know this about Naruto? If he was hiding something so monumentally massive a secret, what else could he be hiding? Natsu felt himself sobering up from his annoyance as he watched the ignorance fade from his father's eyes. Crossing his arms over his chest, he took a step back from the desk, looking away from Minato as he clenched his fists as his amethyst eyes narrowed. Still have any doubts now? Minato hesitatingly shook his head, dropping the page back into his desk as he ran his hands over his face. He could physically feel more and more stress get piled onto his back with each passing second. I have no doubts that Naruto is in fact hiding something. And who knows what else he is hiding, but that still doesn't mean he is against us. Natsu snapped his head to Minato with such speed it almost looked like his head would have soared off his body. Natsu glared at his father, his nails digging into his skin as his eyes flashed with irritation. How can you be so sure? Don't give me this shit just because you feel bad about the way you treated him in the past, like this would make amends for what you did. Minato narrowed his eyes at Natsu, matching his son's glare head on as he pushed down the guilt that snuck its way back into his body. A snarl escaped free from the cage's lips as he spoke. Far from it. There is no way I could make amends for what Kushina and I did to Naruto. I accepted that long ago, and I don't need my very own spoiled son to remind me of a time that I regret dearly. Minato bit back with just as much force, both getting more and more heated. Natsu wanted to laugh at his father's words, finding it completely ironic. Oh yeah, and whose fault was it to spoil me? I sure as hell didn't see you or Ka-san complain about it once until after Naruto ni abandoned us. Natsu replied, venom weeping into his words as the cut Minato. Watch your tone with me, Natsu. I don't care that I am your father, but I am still the Hokage of this village and you will show me the respect I deserve. Minato snarled out. He hasn't felt this angry in years and he couldn't believe it was to his very own son. Even if you are right about why Naruto left us, you have no right to act like the victim when you were just as much responsible for why he left in the first place. We all pushed him away. Take responsibility for your actions for once. Minato said cynically, his blue eyes darkening as they bounced off his downed son's purple. Natsu's hands clenched tighter around his body as he stared at his father. He had to bite the inside of his cheek in order to stop himself from screaming back a retort to his father. He was more than mad at this point, he was downright furious. How dare you lump me in with the likes of you? I never abandoned my brother. I was pushing him to grow stronger cause you wouldn't. The redhead turned his back to his father, he couldn't even stand to look at his father any more than he already had to. He was pissed, he was annoyed, his very core was burning red hot and he didn't know how much longer he had before he let the dam get broken down. No one knew Naruto like he did. Natsu was the one who pushed him around for him to grow. He was responsible for his brother's growth, he's the reason why Naruto was strong. It was always him. Only fools couldn't see that. Whatever, you're a fool for not noticing. Natsu muttered, not sure what he was even commenting on anymore. Think what you want, but I know that my dear little brother is up to something. I know him better than anyone. Ignore the signs for all I care, you'll only get hurt again if you do. And with those final words Natsu left the room, slamming the door behind him with a loud bang. Minato ignored the rudeness of his son as he let out a frustrated groan. He looked back down at the file of his son, freezing for a moment as he tried to gather all of his thoughts together. After a few long agonizing minutes he folded the files into fourths and placed them in his coat pocket before vanishing in a flash of yellow. Later. Kurenai was not happy. In fact, she doesn't remember a time where she had felt so angry and betrayed before in her entire life. It has been one day since she had returned from visiting Naruto from the hospital, where they shared a tender moment after being years apart. But, now Kurenai regretted asking the blonde about his plan. Scowling, Kurenai tightened the bathrobe around her body as she looked deep into her bathroom mirror. Her hair was completely disheveled, looking like she hasn't brushed it in months, and she could faintly see black underbangs starting to form under her eyes from lack of sleep. The Genjutsu master sighed, running her fingers down her face and her under-eye bags. In all honesty, she felt like a fool. She held on to the vision of Naruto when he was still a young kid, where he was the small, frail little boy with a gung-ho attitude. But she was wrong, he had changed, and she wasn't sure if she liked what she saw. His plan scared her a bit, and she didn't know what she should do about it. Kurenai knew he didn't tell her the whole thing. She could see the faint hint of hesitation in his eyes as he spoke. He didn't even want to tell her, and he probably would have never told her if she hadn't insisted on knowing. After he finished explaining everything, she slapped him. She had never seen Naruto look so shocked before in her whole entire life. She was lent up after that. She was still a little upset that he made her an accomplice in the beginning, and now that she learned more, she regretted it. She couldn't help it though, it was totally insane. She was broken out of her train of thoughts when a loud banging reached her ears. She raised her head up from the mirror and towards her front door, where the knocking sound grew more frantic. Kurenai fought back a sigh. She could already feel the persona chakra signature behind her door, and for a split second, she thought about pretending that she wasn't home. Kurenai, come on, open up please. This time Kurenai did sigh deeply, pushing off her bathroom counter and making her way slowly to her front door, not even bothering to make herself presentable as she swung the door open to look face to face with the exact person she was thinking about. What? It's still early and you should still be at the hospital. Naruto frowned, scratching his arm as he looked into Kurenai's cold red eyes with his own blue. Yeah, I snuck out, just used a small henge to get over here. Naruto responded, glancing into her apartment and back to her, hoping she understood what he was silently trying to say to her. Unfortunately for Kurenai, she did know what he was saying. Sighing in frustration, she moved to the side, gesturing for him to come inside with her arm. Naruto smiled thankfully as he walked past the raven-haired beauty and into her apartment. The second he walked in, he was invaded with the all too familiar scent of Kurenai. The smell of vanilla and strawberry was very strong, as well as the faint smell of coffee that she made earlier in the morning. Hearing the door click closed behind him, he turned around, trying to put in his coolest expression as he saw a very annoyed Kurenai looking at him. The beauty walked past him and into her connecting kitchen, folding her arms under her as she sighed again. What do you want, Naruto-kun? I wanted to come and see you. Things are starting to be put into motion now. I know you don't really want to hear this right now, B. You're right, I don't. I don't want to hear anything about it. Kurenai said, cutting him off, her voice raising in volume as she tightened her arms around herself. This is outrageous, and I don't want to even hear about it for even a second more. Look, Kurenai, I'm sorry I came to you for this. I just thought you would understand. Kurenai glared darkly at Naruto. Understand? She started, feeling her body start to tremble with rage as she took a large step towards the blonde. Understand what? Do you really think any sane person would just go along with you on this? Did you really think you could get me to betray? I wasn't asking you to do anything. I only needed you for the scroll. You're the one who insisted on knowing in the first place. Naruto retorted, trying to keep his cool but failing as he felt his Sharingan pulse to life. Kurenai didn't falter at seeing the dojutsu. She met his look head on and scowled. Oh, only needed me for the scroll. Was that all I'm good enough for? Kurenai felt like she was on fire. She was practically pulsating with anger as she tried to stop herself from doing something she would regret. She hates to admit it, but those words hurt more than any injury she had ever had. She always thought Naruto wouldn't do that to her, that he was different. Naruto lost his glare as he watched a singular tear roll down Kurenai's cheek. His expression softened confidently and he raised his hand to scratch the back of his head, looking away from the obviously hurt woman in front of him. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. Kurenai wiped any trace of tears away from her eyes with a huff. Bringing up her hand and clutched it around her heart, her nails digging into the soft fabric of her robe. I thought you were different. What you're planning, I just can't get behind it. No matter how much I care about you. She muttered, looking down as she traced her bare foot across the sodden floor. Finding that to be much more interesting than anything else as the two of them basked in the awkward tension. After a few painstakingly silent seconds she continued. And the thing is, I don't even know why I care about you so much. I barely know you, you're still a kid for sake. But all those years ago, when you put me under then genjutsu, when you left us all alone in Roka Town. I felt all of your emotions, everything you had ever gone through up until that point. She said, reaching out and grabbing his hand. Her soft hand gently caressed his, feeling safe in his larger ones as she placed his plan over her beating heart, feeling her stomach bubbling from the warmth. Naruto despite the situation and couldn't stop himself from blushing at the contact. I felt it all. Your heartbreak, your pain, your envy, your joy, and even, your love. More tears were starting to fall down Kurenai's milky skin as she took in a deep breath, trying to stop her rapidly beating heart trim thundering in her chest. These feelings I have for you aren't organic, but fabricated. Almost forced, since I feel like I must have them cause I've seen yours, no, experienced yours. Naruto looked away, not sure if he could look at Kurenai any longer. Naruto could feel her heart breaking like glass under his hand into a million tiny pieces. Guilt surged through his body and shot into him like a fire hose. He frowned, taking Kurenai's free hand into his with some hesitancy, not sure if he was allowed to. She snapped her hand back as he did so, like it was hot to the touch, making Naruto's face contort in pain. I wanted to forget this feeling. But every time I did, I felt like I was betraying you. That you did this to me so you could always have someone care about you, always have someone there. You said it yourself, you only see me as a mirror of the past. Reflecting on what you want to see, when you were happy. You want that back, so you did this to me. And I hate you for it. Kurenai finished, trying to give her the harshest glare she could muster towards the stupefied blonde. Naruto finally glanced back into Kurenai's dead eyes. The exotic crimson irises that he spent countless nights dreaming of now seemed tainted, burning him up with a single look. Softly, he removed his hand from her chest, letting it drop down to his side as he took a step back. While usually he would have wished to be this close to Kurenai, now it just felt unbelievable wrong. I. Naruto stuttered, he was at a complete loss for words. His mouth opened and closed several times but no words escaped him. An awkward silence fell around the two of them, the tension growing thicker with each passing second. It was so thick that people walking the streets could feel something going wrong in this small room. If you want, I can take them away. Make you forget everything. About me and the plan. Kurenai gasped, eyes going wide as she looked at Naruto in shock. Why? Why would you do that? Naruto couldn't bring himself to smile as the words flowed out of him without restraint. Because I love you, Kurenai. I have since I was a kid. You were on my mind almost constantly before and after I left Konoha. I won't deny what I did to you, but if I can reverse it and make you happy again, I'll do it in a heartbeat. Naruto said, not even feeling any happiness at his impromptu love confession like he thought he would be. Kurenai looked away, balling her hand into a fist as she held it close to her chest. She shut her eyes before turning away from Naruto until her back was facing him. I don't want to forget you. Even though this is fake, or whatever this is I'm feeling. It meant something to me. She said sadly, turning her head to meet Naruto's broken Sharingan eye as he looked at her in sadness. She gave a sad smile, so small that Naruto wasn't even sure he saw it in the first place. I think it's time you go, Naruto. Just go. Naruto slowly nodded, not meeting Kurenai's eyes as he turned around, not wanting her to see the devastation reflecting on his face clear as day. Each step he took felt like a dagger piercing into his heart as he reached her front door, gripping the doorknob with a shaky arm. Can you promise me one thing? Naruto said. Kurenai let her smile drop, hesitantly nodding her head as she noted the distance between the two of them. Whispering a quiet yes in response as she dug her nails into her skin, hoping the pain would help ease what she was feeling on the inside. Naruto stopped, debating on turning around to meet her eyes again but decided against it. Just in case, stay away from the Hokage Tower tomorrow afternoon. Kurenai kept her face blank, trying to imagine the expression that was on the blonde's face at this very moment. After a few harsh seconds she nodded again. She wanted so bad to go over to him and hug him from behind. To tell him it would be okay and that she was there for him. Yet, she couldn't. She could no longer tell that was her own desire, or if it was the desire Naruto implanted in her. I promise. Kurenai whispered quietly, and as soon as the words left her mouth, Naruto was gone. Somewhere in Fire Country. Sasori-sensei. Kise muttered, her eyes going completely wide as her very own sensei turned towards her. Her golden eyes glowing with pure disbelief as she took note of Sasori leaning against a small cabin. Very similar to the one that Naruto and Kise had discovered in Lightning Country, the only difference was the overflowing amount of greenery and flowers that surrounded the area, making the cabin look like a perfect getaway trip. Sasori turned towards the young girl, her voice reaching his ears. His blue cloak swaying in the wind as his chestnut eyes shined with happiness at seeing the young girl. Kise, thank goodness you made it, Sasori said happily, throwing his arms around the young girl and bringing her close to his chest. I was starting to worry about you too. I'm glad to see that you're okay. Kise got over her shock and eagerly returned the hug. She had missed Sasori-sensei these past few months very much. He was the only other familiar in her life and she planned to keep it like that for a long time. Pulling away from the hug, Kise tilted her head, reaching into her pouch and pulling out the note that Naruto had given her. Sasori's face lit up with recognition at the slip of paper. Getting to his feet, he offered his hand to Kise. I see. I guess that does mean everything is set into motion now. Kise put her smaller hand into his, raising her eyebrow as he slowly started to lead her towards the small cabin. What's in motion? Sasori didn't respond to her question as he guided her towards the cabin doors. How is Naruto doing? He's awake now, yes. Kise looked up to Sasori in shock, her hand tensing within his. How did you know he was unconscious? The redhead went silent again, pushing open the cabin doors to reveal a fairly empty inside. Several lanterns lit the inside of the room, hanging from the ceiling by a thin blue chakra string with a large table in the center atop a plain brown rug that matched the cabin's interior. Kise felt her heart rate quicken as she noticed two silhouettes seated at the table. Both immediately recognizable, and her eyes went wide. Taking her hand back from Sasori, she pointed at the man seated to her left, exclaiming loudly. Why, you're that masked man back in Roka. The man frowned, crossing his arms over his blue trench coat as he looked away from the young girl. I have a name, you know. It's Itsumi. And you're Yuno-san. We saw you back at Sasori's sensei's base. Kise yelled, pointing at the other man sitting at the table, this time with a smile on her face. Itsumi's frown turned into a long pout, putting his head down in shame. Am I really that forgettable? Afraid so, Itsumi. Sasori spoke up, walking past Kise and taking a seat directly beside his silver-headed friend. Pulling out a chair for Kise, he continued. But you are the one who threatened Naruto into leaving in the worst possible way. They probably wanted to forget you. Itsumi flinched, subconsciously rubbing his cheek in phantom pain as he remembered the punishment that Yuno had given him after that incident. His matching silver eyes drooped slightly as he slammed his head onto the table, trying to hide his embarrassment. I apologized, didn't I? Not to them. There's just no pleasing you, is there? Itsumi bit back, snapping his head back up as his eyes shined dangerously. Completely over his little funk, like it had never happened in the first place. Sasori scoffed, yelling back just as annoyed. Kise sweet dropped at the scene, scooting her chair further away from Sasori-sensei so she didn't have to be involved in the argument. Kise looked over to Yuno, her brow raised in confusion as she simply pointed to them. Do they do this often? Yuno chuckled, putting his hand on his cheek and nodding. More often than you think. They just can't seem to get along for very long. They've been doing this for the past 5 months. 5 months. But that was when, Kise said, a light bulb appearing over her head as she slammed her hands onto the table. Both Itsumi and Sasori stopped their arguing to look at the brown-haired girl in confusion. While Yuno looked impassive. Oh yeah. Sasori-sensei said something about a plan. What plan? And how did he know that Naru-ni was even unconscious? Yuno nodded his head, shaping his fingers towards both Sasori and Itsumi. Both Atarashi members silently went back to their seats without question, schooling their emotions as Yuno got up from the table. walking over to the window and looking out into the never-ending amount of trees they were surrounded by. Pay attention, Kees-chan. We have important matters to discuss. The next day, Minato sighed, suddenly flashing in the hospital where his son was being kept for the past 2 days. His appearance started some of the passing nurses making them jump in fear. Minato laughed sheepishly, apologizing with a small smile on his face. The female nurses blushed at his smile, giggling and getting back to work with much more pep in their step than usually. As soon as they all left, he felt his smile fall off his face. His argument with Natsu yesterday morning was still very fresh in his mind and he wasn't quite over it yet. He knew he had let some of his anger seep into his words, and he was much more harsher than he originally intended to be. But it wasn't unwarranted by any means. His eldest son had been growing more impulsive in his ramblings and didn't really care about the repercussions of his actions. "To-san, what are you doing here?" Minato turned to his right, smiling at the approaching form of his daughter as she made her way towards him. A look of curiosity formed on her features as she offered her father a small smile and a wave. Minato returned her smile, pointing his thumb over her to the hospital door. "I came to visit Naruto, I haven't seen him yet, so here I am." "Where have you been? You didn't come home last night?" Minato asked with a raised brow. Narumi frowned, tightening her arms around herself. "I spent the night over at Kurenai's. She called me late last night and didn't seem to be doing too well," she said, her eyes drifting over to Naruto's hospital door. Minato picked up on the subtle clue and raised his eyebrow even further. Pushing it into the back of his head for now, he responded, "I see. Well, just try and let me know next time, okay?" "Of course, To-san." Narumi resounded sheepishly, not really feeling guilty for her actions. "So you have anything important to discuss with Naruto?" she asked, noticing the displaced folder Minato was clutching to his person as she started to walk to Naruto's door. Minato raised an eyebrow, stopping his walk and putting a hand on Narumi's shoulder, stopping her in her tracks. The red-headed beauty looked over her shoulder and to her father with confusion. Feeling his hand grab on tighter onto her shoulder, the words died on her lips as she watched Minato's expression change rapidly before her eyes. To confusion, to annoyance, to contemplation, and then finally resting on uncertainty. "To-san, is everything? You lied about Naruto, didn't you?" Narumi internally flinched, her stomach doing flips as her father's eyes unwaveringly met hers. She fought back the urge to gulp loudly as she racked her brain to come up with an answer. If she was quiet for too long, then he would find it suspicious, and if she was caught in a lie, then his suspicions would only skyrocket to unparalleled amounts. She didn't even have enough time to think on how Minato would even find out about Naruto's abilities. She had done an amazing job keeping her lips sealed about the whole thing. So good, in fact, she didn't even stop to think about the possibility of any of her family finding out. Narumi settled on the easy response. "What are you talking about, To-san?" Feigning ignorance, Minato stopped himself from scowling at his daughter. His free hand tightened into a fist, crumpling the folder in his hands even further. He swore each time he saw one of his children, it was like looking at a complete and utter stranger. Narumi had been secretive all those years since Naruto's defection. She never shared any details outside of her mission report, or about what her team training was like. Thinking back on it now, Minato was a fool for not thinking anything of it. Especially since Narumi herself refused any mission regarding Naruto, even going as far to suffer insubordination charges and the loss of her rank to keep whatever she was hiding a secret. And Natsu was no better. He had grown a little too arrogant for his liking. Natsu had done a lot of good for the village. After he was promoted to Junin, he was already one of the top-rated shinobi in Konoha, having completed the most A-rank missions, and second for most S-rank missions completed. Right behind Minato's last living student, Kakashi Hatake. Not only that, but he had undergone intense medical training after learning Sage Mode. Tsunade Senju had taken him on as a sub-apprentice and he was quickly climbing the ladder of professional medical nins the village had ever seen. He was a natural-born prodigy, and he knew it. And he knew it all too well. But Natsu still to this day refuses to take credit for his own losings. Something both Minato and Kushina had tried to teach him when he was young. If anything ever went wrong with him, he was quick to pin the blame on others in order to retain that picture-perfect prodigy image that everyone in the village molded for him. If Natsu disobeyed orders, then the blame would be put on the team leader, stating that the leader should have known better. If something went wrong during training, blame was pushed on his teachers for not showing it to him correctly. It became so torrential bad that Minato was forced to either suspend Natsu for an indefinite period of time, or only give him solo missions. Minato went for the latter. But Naruto was the biggest enigma out of all three kids. It still made Minato sick just remembering the solid proof Natsu had shown him yesterday regarding Naruto's changes. The possibilities that lay dormant behind that hospital room and in his son was unnerving to say the least. He knew Naruto was hiding something big, something massive. Something that he never let any more see unless he wanted him to. It stung Minato to think that, but he knew it was ultimately true. He had failed his duties as a father the second he turned his back on Naruto. He failed his duties as Hokage when he chose willingly to ignore a young dedicated shinobi who wanted nothing more than to learn. He knew he failed, and he knew that no amends would be enough. That being said, it put Minato in a sticky situation. Don't play dumb with me, Narumi. This is not the time, Minato said, releasing his grip from his daughter, crouching slightly to meet her blank eyes, pointing his index finger towards the door. Natsu told me everything. Naruto is in there, hiding something from all of us. I should have noticed it sooner at how adamant you were in not going after him when he went rogue. It was like you felt guilty, that keeping a secret would make up for what you did to him when you were kids. This time Narumi did flinch back. Her father's words felt like 1,000 daggers slowly cutting up her skin, like he wanted her to suffer. Minato wanted to grin, his deduction appeared to be spot on. Watching as his daughter's eyes glanced away from his own sapphire. This is a serious situation, Narumi. Naruto could be dangerous. So you don't trust him. After all this time away from him, you still think he's not worth a chance. Narumi bit back, scoffing as she did so, taking a step away from her father as she watched his eyes go wide. The sight of her father repulsing her at the thought of him still not trusting Naruto. Minato quickly got over his shock. He felt his blood begin to boil, his hands clenched into tight fists as his body started to tremble. He didn't know who anyone in his family was anymore. All were so deluded into their own dreams that they made him sick to his stomach. Minato glared darkly at Narumi, making the 16-year-old take another step back. But this time in sheer fear and surprise, having never seen her father look at another human being like this before. His hands slammed down on her shoulders, clicking his tongue against his canines, fully irritated. That's exactly why I don't trust him. Minato spat out venomously, saliva flying from his mouth and stuck to Narumi's shocked face. He's been gone for years, hiding something so incredibly massive from the entire shinobi world. I have every right to not trust him. All signs point towards him being untrustworthy. Minato didn't care about how loud he was being, or the fact that most of the hospital staff was openly gawking at him in shock. Minato was bottled up and for far too long. What I did to him was unbecoming as a father. I've accepted it, I've come to terms with it, he said, his voice turning colder as his body started to shake again. But I'm the only one who seems to have accepted it. Natsu rages on and on that it was never his fault for Naruto leaving. Kushina is persistent that Naruto will come back to us, ignorant to the facts we laid out for ourselves. And you. His voice sharp, making Narumi's breath hitch in anxiety. You're trying to protect him. No matter how hard you try, you can't help but still feel like his older sister. The need to make it up to someone who even said himself that we aren't family any longer. Minato stopped, not feeling any remorse at his daughter's now tear-stricken face as he straightened his back with a huff. Taking a few deep breaths to calm himself down from his surprising outburst. Looking coldly into his daughter's eyes, he could see that he was right. He was truly the only one who had moved on. You and Natsu need to grow up. He's gone from us. The person behind the door is no brother to you, and no son of mine. We lost that right a long time ago. Taking a few steps past his frozen daughter, picking up the file that he dropped in his verbal frenzy. Not even taking a single glance at Narumi as he grabbed the file. Tucking it under his arm. Your reaction was enough to tell me that I was right in suspecting Naruto of something. I'm done here. Finally taking a look at his daughter. Blue stared at Blue. Narumi felt her knees start to wobble at the look, her body drowning in tension. Go home, Minato said, before leaving in a bright flash of yellow. Narumi finally felt her knees give out, falling to the floor. Using her hands to keep herself from falling on her face as she looked at the tiled ground. Tears continued to flow down her cheeks, and she knew it was impossible to get them to stop. Out of everybody in her life, Minato was the last one she had expected to get made at her like that. But Minato yelling at her isn't what made her sad. No, it was how truthful everything he said had been. She was trapped in her own dream, believing herself to be a victim who tried to make amends for her past actions. Believing that if she catered to Naruto's demands and feelings that things would change for the better. Her father's words stung deep. Like a million scorpions stinging her simultaneously in the chest as a weak sob pushed past her one hand to cover her mouth to encase any more that tried to sneak away from her. She couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh at the whole situation. The laughs muffled by her hand as her shoulders started to tremble from the sensation. This wouldn't have happened, if you were just bettering parents. She laughed aloud, slamming on her fist against the tiles under her. Smashing it into pieces as the shards entered her skin, drawing several drops of blood from the new wound. She opened her eyes. Her laughing finally died down as she stared at her reflection in the white tile below her. Her smile dropped from her face, looking deep into her now bloodshot eyes with lament. Can't come to terms with it. What the do you think I've been doing for the past 3 years? Her pupils started to dilate, all previous warmth expiring in her eyes as she dug her nails into the tile. The screeching sound echoing in the halls as she felt her fingernails start to break off, not caring for the pain as the QB already got started on healing her wounds. I'm the one who took the blunt force from it. I'm the one he beat. I'm the one he could have killed. I'm the one who tried to get closer to him, she growled out. Ignoring the snap of her fingernails breaking. Scratching at the ground as fresh blood stained the porcelain. You want us to just shake it off like it was nothing. Like it didn't matter to us. What bullshit. Narumi felt her blood begin to boil. A small amount of the QB's chakra entered her coils as she got back to her feet. The sheer pressure from the chakra broke more of the floor under her as she walked out of the hospital. Ignoring the way the nurses were looking at her, she didn't care as they moved away from her. She was angry, she was hurt. And she didn't care who knew it or how she showed it. She could feel her skin start to burn with the power that the Kyubi usually gave her. Her presence alone was enough to make people even miles away stop in their tracks. No doubt all of Konoha could feel her presence as she walked down the streets of the village. Heading back towards Kurenai's apartment. They needed to have a talk. Yes, Narumi herself had bottled up more than she knew. And the bottle finally broke. Meanwhile, Minato had flashed back to the Hokage Tower. Ignoring the greeting by his receptionist as he walked past her and straight into the council room. Where he was greeted by all the clan heads, and his 3 advisors. Minato had called for an emergency council meeting last night to be held in the morning regarding what he would do regarding Naruto. He knew it was foolish to ask if everyone was aware of the fact that Naruto was back in the village. He was sure the whole village already knew about his return the moment he got back. It only takes one set of eyes to notice, then it would be spread around like wildfire. And judging by the looks Minato was getting from everyone present, it made it even more obvious that everyone knew. Ignoring the ostracized looks, he walked calmly to his chair at the very end. Taking a seat, throwing the file on the table, folding his arms over his chest. Minato's mere presence alone was enough to thicken the atmosphere to unbearable levels. You could practically cut the tension with a knife as all eyes were looking at the Hokage expectantly. If they didn't have the experience as a shinobi, they would have no doubt passed out from the deadly aura that Minato was excreting. Choza Akamaki, the clan head of the Akamaki clan, stood up. Ignoring the bead of sweat that rolled down his eyebrow as he bowed to the village leader. Is everything okay, Hokage-sama? Why call a meeting so early? Minato stayed silent, moving his eyes to glance over at the Akamaki clan head, making him wince from the intensity. Minato uncrossed his arms, leaning back into his chair and snapping his fingers. Within seconds an Anbu appeared next to him, already bowing to the Hokage. Yes, Hokage-sama. Go and find my son Natsu. Ask him to retrieve and accompany Naruto Namikaze to the chambers this instance. Minato's voice was empty as he gave his orders. The Anbu nodded his head and quickly flashed away to go do his mission. Hokage-sama, if I ma. Shut up, Danzo. Minato bit at the bandaged man, making him purse his lips as the clan heads looked over at Minato at shock. Never in their lives have they ever seen Minato snap at somebody before, well, someone in Konoha. He was always so happy and go lucky. It was one of the reasons why people loved and idolized him so much. He was easy to approach and always gave a warm welcome, even to enemy villages and shinobi. I don't have time to deal with your shit, or with your preaching about weapons again. We have a serious matter to discuss here and I expect you to be on your best behavior. Minato said, painting a dark glare to the bandaged man. Danzo clicked his tongue against his teeth, his grip tightening around his cane, holding him up as he nodded hesitantly. He had a vague idea of what this meeting was going to be about, and getting shut down by the Hokage so quickly really put a damper on his own agenda. And the fury shining in Minato's eyes was odd. Something seemed to have sparked within the Hokage that started a burning that was plainly visible to all that looked at him. Danzo looked away from Minato, ignoring the looks he got from several of the clan heads, as you with Hokage-sama. Minato huffed in response to the elder, resting his hand on his cheek as he looked pointedly at the Nara head leader, Shikaku Nara. The lazy leader felt his own spine straighten up as well. The laziness that usually reflected in his eyes got washed away and replaced with seriousness. The blonde Kage slid the file on the table toward Shikaku with his free hand. Shikaku watched as the heavily crumbled file stopped sliding as it reached him. Raising a brow in question, he opened it to look through, his face growing paler by the second. The rest of the clan heads watched him with growing interest. Hiyashi Hyuga was tempted to use his Byakugan to try and see what Shikaku was looking at. To get ahead of the rest of the clans and try and gather more information that could prove useful to help grow his clan to even stronger heights. Since the Uchiha clan was no more, Hiyashi wanted to solidify his place as the strongest clan in Konoha. But Hiyashi held down the urge to do so as Minato silently watched them all. Almost like he was egging him on to try and do something as his blue irises danced around the room. Growling to himself, he decided to stay patient, crossing his arms under his robe with a silent huff. Danzo already had a talking to and Hiyashi didn't need to one himself. Unbeknownst to him, Sumizuka and Shibi Aburame of their respective clans were thinking along the same lines. Both trying to find ways to try and read what was on the file that Shikaku was reading. Sum ended up giving up shortly after seeing that her dogs were unable to get around and get a peek. They could only smell the panic resonating off of Shikaku and it made her Nukanins whimper slightly. Shibi Aburame tried something similar, having his microscopic bugs fly towards Shikaku silently in hopes to get the general idea on what he was reading. Not soon after he sent them out they had returned, shaking and sneaking back into his clothes. No doubt totally spooked and couldn't even dare get close to Shikaku thanks to Minato's threatening presence. Hiding himself behind his mask like usual he gave up, taking the loss with a heavy heart. The only two who seemed to have good intentions were Choza and Inoki Yamanaka. Both were looking over at their friend with growing concern. They have known Shikaku since the academy. In fact, everyone at this table minus the three advisors had all gone to the academy together. And they knew how Shikaku acted, and in all the years they have been friends and teammates they had never seen him go so pale and honest shock. Whatever he was reading, must have struck the Nara genius deep down into his very core. Hokage-sama, is. Debrief them all, Minato said, cutting Shikao off as he leaned further back into his chair. Glaring into nothingness as he drummed his fingers on the table in front of him. Don't spare a single detail. Everything in there is the truth. I will explain everything further once our guest has arrived. Natsu Namikaze stood outside the hospital, looking at the tall white building with a strong sense of melancholy. He loved working here, it was always a nice feeling to help someone in need. The feeling to save another person, being the catalyst that reunites them with their special people was always such a strong and euphoric feeling that overtook the body. But, it was also what he wanted to get back dearly. Shaking his head from his thoughts he slowly walked into the hospital. The sliding doors opening up for him as he was met with a somber room full of people. Noticing the tension in the room he raised his eyebrow. It seemed no one had noticed his entrance so he slowly made his way to the center of the room where the nurses were gathered. What happened? Why is everyone crowded around here? The nurses jumped in surprise at the voice. Some even turn around to look back at Natsu in shock, not expecting someone to catch them by surprise. Especially by the close proximity Natsu was to them. Before any of the nurses could even respond, Natsu finally caught sight of what they were looking at. A few streaks of blood lined the tile floors, looking like someone was trying to escape from an insane asylum as the sanguine liquid was sprawled across the floor. Not only that, but Natsu could see faint traces of broken fingernails scattered around, like they were ripped or torn off forcefully. Natsu pushed closer, bending down to get a better look. What happened? He asked, looking at the magnitude of the smashed tiled lining around him. He hadn't even noticed it before, but even at the entrance some seemed to be destroyed. He looked up at the closest nurse to him, watching her fidget nervously in place as she hugged her clipboard closer to her chest. Playing with the hem of her hospital uniform, blushing as Natsu looked at her. Actually Natsu-sama. Narumi-sama had done this not too long ago. Narumi? He questioned aloud, taken aback by the response. Looking back at the destroyed floor with more interest than before. Is that so? Why yes, she and Hokage-sama had gotten into a pretty bad argument this morning. It was quite a shocking scene to witness, the nurse replied. Natsu hummed in response, pondering what he was just told. An argument seems to be the common trend these days, he thought with some amusement. Though he did wonder what the argument that his sister and father would have had. They rarely argued at all. In fact, they seemed to agree on most things ever since childhood. They were like two peas in a pod to one another. While Natsu took much more from Kushina's side. So it was strange to even think about the two of them getting into a little spat. But he did have one idea. His eyes moved towards Naruto's hospital door. Several emotions fluttered in his gut as he did so. The only possible answer he could come up with that made the most sense would have to be Naruto. It seemed that no matter what the time of day it was, when it was, or where. Ever since Naruto's return, the past 2 days have been some of the most stressful for the Namikaze family. Natsu himself hadn't actually talked to Narumi since Naruto returned. Actually, thinking about it, Natsu hasn't even seen Kushina lately either. When he got home last night, Minato was still awake in his study working hard on something in secret. Though Natsu assumed he was working on deciphering the seals hidden on Naruto's body. But Natsu did take notice of the absence of his mother from the house. It was quite strange since he knew that she hadn't come to visit Naruto once. Also, Narumi didn't return home last night either. Do you know what their argument was about? Natsu asked, getting back top his feet and looking at the nurse. Well, it was all over the place. But I believe it was about Naruto-san, the nurse said timidly but honestly. Natsu just nodded at the answer, confirming his suspicions as he walked around the nurses. Very well. Get this cleaned up and get back to work. Too many of you are just standing around doing nothing. Yes, Natsu-sama. After his quick order, they all quickly snapped back into work mode. The nurse who he was previously talking to had already begun cleaning up the blood and sweeping the shards of tile into a bin. Ignoring the group of now bustling nurses, he made his way to Naruto's door. He had too much on his mind to worry or care about a fight with his family. That was becoming a much more common occurrence as of late and barely what he could focus on. On the list of importance, it was strictly at the bottom. He had already wasted enough time mingling with the nurses at the front. His father had given him strict orders to grab Naruto and take him to the council chambers. And on the list of importance, this was at the very top. But on the other hand, Natsu was starting to get excited. Natsu would finally get what he was seeking. It was only a matter of time before the walls started to decay away and leave Naruto vulnerable, like he was when they were kids. That's right. I'll get my little brother back. Natsu grinned, his thoughts pumping more and more adrenaline into his body and into his veins. He almost felt giddy, like a kid on Christmas who had just received the gift that he was begging his parents for since Easter. He was on cloud 9, things finally felt like they were falling into place for him. Natsu was about to push open the door to Naruto's room, but before he could, the door itself swung open. Natsu's grin drooped down, his lips now pursed into a deathly thin line. Narrowing his eyes at the boy who opened the door to the room. Natsu clicked his tongue, eyeing the familiar black-headed boy that had dropped off Naruto's comatose body in such a rush 2 days ago. Natsu looked past the boy to see the unsurprised eyes of his brother, looking at him with a small smile. The boy's eyes turned wide as he noticed the dark look Natsu was giving him. Without wasting any more time, he bowed to Natsu before taking a long-lasting last look towards Naruto. It was good to see you again, Blondie-kun. Yes, you too, and thank you, Naruto said, crossing his arms over his chest as he looked away from the two boys. Natsu stayed silent as he watched the now identified Sai quickly escape the room, pushing past Natsu rather rudely and vanishing behind the hospital doors. Natsu watched the boy leave with interest, his eyes staying narrowed in question. Something seemed off about him. He looked like he was in a trance. Natsu thought to himself with little intrigue. He wasn't expecting anyone to be in Naruto's room. The surprise was quickly diminished as he looked back towards his brother. Naruto's back still facing him as Natsu stepped into the room, not bothering to shut the door as he leaned on the door frame. Who was that? I was told you weren't allowed to have any visitors today. Natsu crossed his arms as well, taking note that Naruto seemed to have shed the hospital gown and was now fully dressed in his clothes he was brought here in. They seemed to have undergone a deep wash and were now blood-free, pristine like they were brand new. Naruto turned back around, finally meeting his brother's eyes with a big smile. Natsu was a tad confused at his brother's attitude. He seemed to be in a much better mood than the previous 2 nights. The nurses said I was so good today that they lifted the rule for me, he said, smiling all the while as he leaned against his freshly made bed. Natsu watched his brother with a keen eye. I gave the nurses strict orders to not allow Naruto any visitors today, he thought, eyes glazing down at his bed. Fully dressed and he made his bed. It's almost like he was expecting to leave here today. Schooling his features and pushing away his thoughts into the back of his head for now, he waved his hand for Naruto to follow, which his brother did with no hesitation. Two-san had called a council meeting, so let's get going. Naruto laughed as he fell in step directly next to his brother. Natsu looked over to Naruto, confused on why he was laughing. Naruto noticed Natsu's questioning look and couldn't help but laugh some more. Sorry. You're just so serious that it brought back a lot of memories, he said in between his laughter. Natsu couldn't help but feel a genuine smile play across his lips as he looked away from Naruto. But as soon as it made its appearance, it vanished without a trace, like it was a mirage. I assume more bad than good. Naruto's laughter was brought to a halt at Natsu's words as they stepped out of the hospital and into the crowded streets of Konoha. Our blonde hero stayed silent for a few minutes as he walked down the familiar path of his home village, feeling a very strong sense of nostalgia, with a loud undertone of melancholy hidden underneath. While they were walking, he noticed that several of the civilians passing by would stop and stare at the two of them. And if Natsu noticed, he didn't seem to care to react to it. But for Naruto, it was like he was being judged just by how he was walking. Strangers' eyes never left him, and small quiet whispers started to grow as a few crowds started to form. Though Naruto couldn't blame them. He was a rogue ninja after all, and it's very rare for one to be walking the streets of their home village, even if he was being attended by the village prince. You think it's alright for me to walk around without a seal on me? You know, like hindering my chakra or something? Naruto asked, pushing his hands into his pockets as he looked up to the sky, paying a bizarre amount of focus on the ever-slow passing sun above his head in the cloudless sky. It doesn't matter. If you try anything, I could stop you right away, so there would be no point. Naruto fought back the urge to scowl at Natsu, his hands tightening to fists in his pockets. I see. Sorry for suggesting then, Naruto responded. The blonde could feel his brother's eyes on him, but he chose to ignore it, finding it much easier to stare at the sky than at anything else. Both fell into slow, methodical steps as they walked side by side in silence for the rest of the way to the Hokage Tower. Neither knew what to say to one another. Natsu thought he had a lot to say to Naruto, but walking in such a tense silence had him second-guessing himself. There was a bunch he wanted to discuss, but most of it would have to wait until they entered the council room. It would do no good to ask Naruto about it out in the open with no witnesses. But looking at his brother from the corner of his eye, he could see that Naruto was walking with much more confidence than someone in his position should. He didn't seem worried. In fact, he seemed like he was expecting something like this to happen. Naruto was the hardest puzzle to solve. It was like the blonde kept hiding his pieces or changing them out for new ones whenever he felt like it. Making sure no one would ever finish it and see the final product, keeping it a mystery as he flipped it around on you in the most unpredictable ways. Say Natsu, can I ask you something? Natsu was broken out of his thoughts as he glanced at Naruto again. Masking his surprise as Naruto's eyes were looking deep into his own. Natsu nodded his head as both of them walked into the Hokage Tower. Naruto scratched the back of his head, his features going blank, eyes looking dull. If the village were to be attacked, who is the one person you would want to save? Natsu stopped his walking almost immediately after Naruto spoke, his mouth falling open in shock as his head snapped towards his brothers. Naruto didn't even bother to stop walking as he passed Natsu, drawing even closer to the council chambers. Getting over his shock, Natsu eyed his brother with a good amount of suspicion. Narrowing his eyes even further. Why? Why would he ask me that? Natsu thought irritably. Just another piece that Naruto temporarily added to this never-ending game of his. Natsu looked at the retreating form of Naruto's back. Why are you asking? Natsu asked. It was like Naruto knew he was getting stared at because he stopped walking. Like something forcefully stopped him from taking another step. Naruto turned his head, blue eyes stared into purple for what seemed like forever. Eventually Naruto looked away, shrugging his shoulders like he didn't have a single care in the world. Just curious, I guess. Natsu knew that was a loaded response. He knew his brother better than anyone. He knew Naruto didn't just ask things like this just cause he was curious. No, he did things for a reason. He couldn't prove it, but his gut was telling him to believe it. Naruto was already suspect number one in his eyes. Especially since that girl that clung to him had been missing as of late as well. Natsu tried to gather anything he could from Naruto's eyes, hoping to catch a glimpse of his true intentions behind those sapphire doors of his, but to no avail. His eyes remained empty, deprived of any emotions and drained of life. The Namikaze wanted to scoff, but held off on doing so as he took a step forward. Then, Narumi, he answered honestly, walking up to Naruto, grabbing him tightly by the hair and yanking him down to his level, which wasn't very much. Naruto didn't even try to fight back as Natsu manhandled him. Instead he stayed silent, as deep violet eyes turned crimson in front of him, glaring at him with a heavy amount of fury. Natsu then spoke, his voice having dropped several octaves. I know you're up to something, Naruto Ototo. This facade of yours can't fool me no matter how hard you try. Natsu growled out, tightening his hands around his brother's long blonde locks and pulling upward. He grew more annoyed when he didn't see what he wanted. He didn't see Naruto wince in obvious pain. I know you better than anyone, Ototo. Don't play these games with me. Natsu finished with a sneer, fighting back the urge to strike Naruto as he saw his face morph into a wry smile, flashing his canines. I didn't know we were playing a game, Naruto said, his eyes challenging, making Natsu scowl deeper. Letting go of the blonde's hair to grip him by the collar of his shirt, bringing their faces closer together until they were inches apart. Don't worry, Ototo. Right past that door is where you'll crumble and break down. Just like you used to do in the past. It's only a matter of time. Point taken, Nisama. With a gruff, Natsu released Naruto, pushing his brother forward until they were mere inches away from the large door leading into the council chambers. Natsu pushed down the strange feeling that erupted in his gut at hearing Naruto call him Nisama. It was strangely warm, but it burned like ice. Almost like he was mocking the mere idea of it, but respected where it came from. Feeling even more irritated than before, he pushed Naruto again. This time with much more force, forcing Naruto to stumble into the large council room as he fell to the floor. Naruto once again didn't bother to try and stop Natsu as he got pushed to the ground. I brought him to San. Natsu said aloud, passing by his pathetic-looking brother without even sparing him a second glance as he took to stand right next to his father without another word. Very good. Now let's get right to business. Naruto's ears perked up at the commanding voice of his father wafted its way over to him. Naruto was shocked momentarily, looking up from the ground, only to see deep blue sea eyes looking at him accusingly. Huh, that's unexpected. Naruto slowly picked himself up from the ground, getting back to his feet as he dusted himself off. While he did so, he silently looked around the room. surprised that all the clan elders were looking at him with the same eyes of suspicion like his father was. Some even looked at him with slight fear hidden behind their irises. But his eyes finally settled onto the one man he wanted to see most of all. The man was standing directly to Minato's left, in between two other old people he did not recognize, or care to remember for the future. He felt the all-too-familiar sensation start to bubble up in his stomach, and he had to fight the urge to activate his Sharingan and get rid of that trash right here and now. But that just wouldn't do. Masking his face and pushing down what he was actually feeling, he stepped forward, looking around him with interest shining in his face. The elders watched him, expecting the worst. But they weren't prepared when Naruto turned to them, scratching the back of his head bashfully with a pout on his face. Or Tou-san, I don't even get a chair to sit in. Both Minato and Natsu both felt their eyes widen at Naruto's words, more Minato than his son. The cage felt his determination begin to crack as he heard the words from his son that he hadn't heard him speak in 10 years. Minato physically winced, tightening his hands to fists under the table as he tried to steer himself back. No, this is exactly what he wants. He wants to use this as a crutch for us to let our guards down. Making sure his little crack went unseen, he looked at Naruto with a pointed expression. You may either stand or sit on the floor. Naruto internally frowned, surprised that his father didn't fall for the obvious trap he put out for him. That trick had even worked on Natsu to a certain extent. It seemed his father had finally grown a pair and decided to own up to his own mistakes. It was surprising to our blonde hero. Then I'll stand, Naruto replied lazily, shifting onto his other leg and rubbing the back of his head. Minato slowly nodded his head, not caring either way what his son picked. Minato raised his hands and intertwined his fingers together, covering his mouth as he leaned forward. By any chance, do you know why you're here, Naruto? Minato's words were like ice, cold to the sound and unbelievably freezing as they touched Naruto's skin. As the words finished leaving the blonde cage's mouth, a thick tension rolled over the room. The only sound that was heard was the slow, uneven breathing of everyone in the room, letting it echo against the walls as it bounced around. It was so quiet a pin dropping would sound like an earthquake under the tense atmosphere. All eyes now trained on Naruto, all looking at him expectantly. Naruto shifted his posture again, the air being so thick and brittle that it could snap at any moment. Naruto just shrugged his shoulders, peeking over to the eerily silent bandaged man in the corner. Not sure. It could be a lot of things. Naruto said, counting on his fingers with a thoughtful expression. Could be attacking her on-duty shinobi, hiding some sort of secret. Or it could even be abandoning Konoha, he said, tapping his chin with his index finger and furrowing his brows. Though I doubt it's that last one. Is this some kind of game to you? Hiyashi Hyuga yelled, slamming his hands on the table and glaring darkly at the young blonde Namikaze. His Byakugan flaring to life, making the veins pop out around his eye socket dangerously. Ha, funny, Natsu-ni-sama said the same thing earlier. Naruto laughed, rubbing the back of his head with a playful grin. To say that everyone in the room was shocked would be a huge understatement. They were utterly floored by the rogue Namikaze's attitude. Even Natsu was showing signs of shock, having not seen Naruto act like this even when they were kids. Hiyashi Hyuga growled, the blonde's attitude was beginning to piss him off. That playful smile seemed to come off as arrogant as Hiyashi's Byakugan moved around Naruto's body. Internally the Hyuga leader wanted to curse himself. The real reason he activated his dojutsu was to see if what was in the file was actually correct. But sadly he was unable to see nothing out of the ordinary with the boy's system. The only thing you could call peculiar was how thin his chakra looked to be in his coils. You don't seem to be taking this very seriously, Naruto-san. You do understand the predicament you are in, correct? Tsume Inuzuka said this time, her dogs growling next to her. Her tone was like ice, and her glare was even colder as it cut through the thick air. Naruto merely shrugged his shoulders again, uncaring. Not really. Truthfully, I haven't really done anything wrong. Listen here, you brat. Tsume-sama, please refrain from screaming at our guest. Tsume scowled deeply, glaring at Shikaku who cut her off mid-sentence. The Nara leader ignored the look before looking at Minato. Both seemed to share a silent conversation as the cage nodded his head to Shikaku. Shikaku sighed, he always hated council meetings. And this one seemed to be the most troublesome one yet. Getting up from his seat, He turned to look at the bored eyes of Naruto. Just as their eyes met, Naruto's ears perked up, looking at the Nara leader with a hint of a smile. Hey, you're Shikamaru's dad, aren't you? I think I've seen you at his house before. Shikaku stayed impassive, but his brow did raise a tiny bit. Shikaku didn't think that the blonde would remember him. Most people didn't, since he usually kept to himself, and was only well known for his clan name only. Both didn't miss the slight surprise that shined within Minato's eyes at the information. Yes, it seems you remember who I am. Thank you for keeping Shikamaru company all those years ago. You really made an impression on him. Naruto smiled cheekily, giving a small laugh as he nodded happily. I should be the one thanking him. When Shisui died, he was the one to pick me up and save me. I owe him a lot. Naruto answered honestly, his left eye shooting another glance towards Danzo as he spoke. Shikaku nodded, ignoring the angry musings of Sume next to him to stop stalling and get on with it. When the name Shisui was dropped, several people looked at Naruto in confusion, especially Natsu. Natsu felt something in his chest burn at hearing that. His eyes narrowed as they stayed into their red slits as he glared at the blonde. Natsu's hands tightened into tight fists as he crossed his arms. The way Naruto spoke about this Shisui person was warm and tender, completely the opposite of how he spoke to Narumi and himself. It made him angry beyond belief. But we can catch up at a later time, depending on how this goes. Shikaku stated, drawing Naruto's full attention onto him, and many of the other elders. Let's get right down to business. The first thing I'm sure we're all curious about is, why abandon Konoha to begin with? Naruto's smile fell off his face as he sighed, scratching the back of his head and pointing his thumb over to Minato and Natsu. They have a big part to play as in why I left, refusing to train me or even include me into family activities and whatnot. But after Shisui died, I had nothing left here anymore, and I was promised a better life if I left. So I did. Naruto stated, like it was the easiest thing in the world to comprehend. Minato tried his best to ignore the pungent looks he was starting to get from the elders around him as he frowned. He expected something like that to be brought up, but it still stung a bit. Even if he was over it all. Very well. One more question. I'll take it from here, Shikaku. Minato said, leaning forward from in his seat. Shikaku merely gruffed and sat down annoyed. The Hokage had asked him to do the questioning at the meeting today after he read the file out to everyone. Why would he say that if he would just cut in and do it himself? How troublesome. Minato breathed heavily as he looked at his son for the first time in years. He looked older, much older than his age would tell you. Both the blue eyes met and both were surprised by how foreign they looked to one another. Minato couldn't help but feel his insides tear again in a very small amount guilt no matter how hard he tried. He was still incredibly angry, that remained strong inside of him and he wasn't sure if it would go away anytime soon. But he couldn't deny the fact that Naruto looked so much like him, that they still shared the same blood. Schooling his features entirely, Minato settled just to glare at Naruto, surprising the blonde boy just enough to make him raise an eyebrow. Minato flung his hand in the air dismissing Naruto's answer. Frankly, I don't care why you left Konoha, he said, ignoring the looks he was getting from everyone present, minus a select few. I'm more fascinated by a few other things. Like these, slamming the file of Naruto on top the desk in front of him with enough force for it to echo in the room. He narrowed his eyes at Naruto. You have two discreetly hidden seals placed on your body that you have been keeping hidden all this time. The one on your eye is blocking access to your whole eye and nervous system completely. And the second. Minato didn't break eye contact once as he spoke, pointing down to Naruto's chest. Was an even bigger seal placed on your stomach, and it is painstakingly similar to the one I used to seal the QB into my two kids. Minato's words did nothing to Naruto as he just nodded his head. He crossed his arms over his chest as a coy smile danced on his lips. My, that is rather interesting, he said through his grin, making the Inuzuka, Akamaki, and Yamanaka clan heads breath die in their thoughts. Minato growled, he could feel the air in his chest wanting to take over with each passing second that ticked by. Like a metronome of anger that refused to stop ticking. Naruto was acting why, this could be life or death for Minato's youngest child, and he didn't seem to have a care in the world as he stood there with a grin on his face. Well, he would prove that he wasn't the Hokage just for show. Yes, it is interesting, considering that a Bayu cannot be sealed into a child that is under the age of 12. Their bodies just wouldn't be able to handle the barrage of new chakra entering their systems and would most likely die, or be unable to mold chakra again. Which would mean someone had given you this seal when you still lived here, in Konoha. So it's just mere speculation that whatever this strange seal is on me, is holding a Bayu. Naruto laughed at his father, his face in one of his hands as he tried to hold in his growing giggles. It could just be a tattoo, you know. Yes, it could be. But look at the facts here. Minato leaned back into his chair, his grin challenging as a few chuckles escaped his mouth as well. I'm the world's #1 seal master, I know more about seals than anyone in the elemental nations. Using a seal and trying to lie about what it is. Don't be so ignorant, he responded back. Well, if you're saying that I've had this since I was a child, then shouldn't a seal master such as yourself have known about it all these years? Not if the seal was being masked completely by a series of hiding seals placed on top of it. It's only visible now because of the amount of damage you sustained before reaching Konoha. Well then, let's say you're correct. Shouldn't the Hyuga over there, and Natsu be able to sense and see a Bayu if it was inside of me? Naruto retorted with a grin, placing a hand on his hip as he watched both Natsu and Hiashi frown. Minato glanced at the Hyuga, who just slowly shook his head in response. He's right, Hokage-sama. I see nothing else besides his own chakra. Hiashi said sadly. It's true too, San. Even with my Sage Mode and the Kyuubi, we can't sense anything in him. Natsu said, his face as cool as ever. Minato hummed in response, looking as if he was deep in thought as Naruto's grin started to grow. Under normal circumstances, sure. But what is normal about this situation? Minato asked aloud, not expecting an answer as he started to smirk, running his hand through his hair confidently. I mean, it's not complicated for a master to make a chakra concealing seal like that one on yours. And if a Bayu wasn't sealed within you, then the seal wouldn't still be residing on your body. It would have faded away by now. Minato's words seemed to bounce off the room's walls as it hit everyone differently. Minato felt incredible joy as he watched Naruto's own grin fall off his face, turning into a frown that spoke louder than any response. But Minato didn't stop there. Also, the seal on your eye. Why would you have one over your left eye? He got up from his seat, pacing around his desk with a collected pep in his step, finding it fascinating to peel back the layers of his sun. Shrugging his shoulders like Naruto had done earlier, he continued. I mean, what could you be hiding in that left eye of yours, except maybe? Minato danced around his words, snapping his fingers like he had figured something out. Didn't you say something about being close to Shisui? Shisui Uchiha. Naruto frowned even deeper, slowly nodding his head as he felt himself get pushed back into a corner by his father. That's right. Fascinating. And weren't you there that day of the Uchiha massacre? If I recall, you were found just under 2 miles away from the central compound, right? Naruto growled, nodding his head in annoyance and not even bothering to respond. Minato grinned, stopping just in front of his son and crouching down slightly to meet his eyes head on. Minato's voice came out as a whisper, but it was still loud enough for everyone present to hear. Then suddenly, you were left alone there. A young 8-year-old boy who now had a scar tainting his skin for the rest of his life, but there's no possible way for such a young boy who got slashed across his eye, to leave with the very same eye, is there? Minato challenged, waiting patiently in front of Naruto as they looked back into each other's eyes. Naruto felt his insides churn. He wasn't expecting his father to have done so much research for today's meeting. It was surprising, he would have never thought that Minato would be the one who would back him into a corner like this. Naruto would have bet that it would have been Natsu hands down, but this was an upset he was not prepared for. Though deep down, somewhere hidden in Naruto's heart, he liked this change for his father. Naruto could see it painstakingly clear in Minato's eyes. There was no longer recognition in those sapphire orbs. Minato was looking at him like he was an equal, just another shinobi in the world that could pose a threat to the village that he swore to protect with his life. Looking away from Minato, he glanced towards Danzo, making sure their eyes didn't meet for very long, but was just long enough to see the barely visible hint of surprise and understanding reflecting off of the man's condescending gaze. Minato, finally seeing Naruto break eye contact, looked towards his other son in the room. Natsu, What did you find out about that day? Natsu stepped forward, his eyes still crimson as he spoke loudly. I reviewed all the medical files for Naruto, too-san. They reported that the cut Naruto received on that day was deep enough to slice his eye clean in two. In fact, they even said in the file that it was a miracle that Naruto still had his eye. And for the life of them, they just couldn't figure out why. Naruto looked away from the room of people, taking a long step away from his father, isolating himself as he rested his head into his hands. Naruto's body started to slowly tremble, his shoulders bouncing up and down rapidly. Natsu looked ready to attack, but Minato pushed his hand forward, stopping the red-haired Namikaze from moving towards him. Even the clan elders were beginning to get worried. Hiashi had his Byakugan already activated, back-to-back with the Aburame as large beetles flew around him. Sume's dogs began to growl, biting through the thick atmosphere with their fangs as Sume herself drummed her long fingernails across the shaking table. The Ino Shikacho trio huddled together, all three waiting for an attack from Naruto. Naruto stood frozen in place, his body shaking heavily as a few muffled sounds echoed out from his mouth. Minato narrowed his eyes even further, pursing his lips into a thin line as he scoffed. And once again, feeling no remorse for Naruto's condition. It's no use. Narumi told me everything already. Minato bluffed, hoping it would force Naruto into coming. Ha ha, ha. Naruto giggled, his hand doing nothing to hide his cackling as it grew louder. Moving his hand from his mouth to cover his left eye, he couldn't hold it in any more. He bursted out laughing, gut-busting laughter that shook all clan elders to their very core. His laughter was border on maniacal, forcing itself unhealthy out of his throat, making it sound subdued and scratchy. Naruto's body stayed trembling, having to hold his side from the sheer amount of amusement he was feeling. Minato couldn't move, the sight of Naruto like this filling him with buckets of unease, making it hard to stomach. The laughter only grew louder in volume as time went on, no one daring to move a muscle in response. The Hokage fumed, his eyes glowing dangerously as he snapped his fingers again, lowering his arm from Natsu. The redhead just grinned. It was all he needed. With speeds that would make even the most experienced Junin jealous, Natsu vanished from his previous spot, appearing behind Naruto and grabbing both of his arms and pinning him to the ground. With a loud bang, the blonde's head smacked against the concrete floor beneath, barging his delirious laughter to a halt once and for all. But Naruto's grin remained, shocking everyone present as he looked up. His left eye now a deep crimson with 3 spinning tomos inside his iris. Everyone tensed, snapping their heads away from Naruto to avoid eye contact with him. Minato felt his face go pale, looking away as his heart dropped a million stories in his chest. Natsu didn't have any time to be surprised as he tightened his grip on his brother, his long canines shining dangerously as he glared at Naruto, pushing down his shock into the depths of his mind for now as his nails dug into the back of Naruto's arms. Naruto chuckled again, spitting out a good amount of blood from his mouth. How perceptive of you too-san. I guess you deserve a reward. I'll tell you all the truth now, he said, grinning all the way, making his Sharingan spin wildly. Natsu chuckled darkly, making sure his nails punctured Naruto's skin as he pushed him deeper into the ground. Like you're in any state to be as conceited as you are. This superiority complex of yours is getting out of hand. Natsu sneered venomously. Ooh, like you're one to talk. Naruto giggled out, ignoring the pain in his arm as Natsu held back on breaking it. Natsu growled, shut the up and answer already. Naruto pouted, looking down at the ground as he pressed his cheek further into the floor, attempting to shrug. Fine, fine. Then yes, everything you said was correct. You're looking at the former Jinchuriki of the Sanbi. See come again. Minato muttered, shocked to his very core. Sure, he suspected something like this to happen after finding out about Naruto's hidden seal. But finally being confirmed for him, it proved to be a hard pill to swallow. Natsu himself felt his eyes go wide, losing some of the Kyuubi's influence as his eyes unturned back to their normal purple. His grip loosened on his brother, freeing the blonde slightly from the death grip. Naruto didn't even try to move from his spot. Naruto nodded again, starting to get fed up with all of this as he turned to look into his father's still eyes. Yep, I was attacked by the Akatsuki around 5 months ago now, and I had that stupid turtle extracted from me. It's the reason I was unconscious for so long, he said nonchalantly, turning to his brother still on his back. I told you that, didn't I? Back in the hospital room a few days ago, it was that blue bastard Kisame who almost killed me. But why? Why did you hide all this? Minato asked, his voice lowering into a whisper as Naruto looked back to him. Naruto almost laughed at the pathetic look on Minato's face. Some things just never change. Do you really expect me, someone who was left behind for so long, someone who was ridiculed for just being alive, would want to come forth and tell the world my deepest secrets? He scoffed. What a stupid question to ask. Hokage-sama. Danzo spoke up as he stepped forward, getting a closer look at the scene playing in front of him. All eyes now turned towards the old war hawk, and for a split second Naruto's eye seemed to take on a different shape. Obviously this boy cannot be trusted. We should throw him in a cell and force him to tell us all he knows. Minato froze at the war hawk's words, honestly pondering the old war hawk's words as he looked back to Naruto. Catching a glimpse of Natsu nodding his head. I agree too, San. Naruto can't be trusted. Before we came in here he even asked me what I would do if the village were to be attacked. What? Hiashi, Tsume, and Inoki yelled, glaring daggers at the downed blonde boy. Hokage-sama, we must detain this nuisance at once. It's a miracle he hasn't already snapped at us already. Hiashi screamed angrily. Bakugan flared as he entered his family's taijutsu stance. Minato grew restless, glaring down at Naruto just as he started to yawn like he was bored. Breathing a weary sigh, Minato started to calm himself down, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a seal that was just about the size of his palm. Natsu and Naruto both peered over at the seal with interest, not aware that Minato had prepared a seal in advance. Naruto felt his eyes go wide as saucers as Minato picked him up from his hair, forcing Natsu off of him and holstering him upwards. Before Naruto could even react, he felt Minato slam his hand into his gut. Naruto wheezed loudly, blood flying from his mouth in pain as Minato slammed the seal he just unpocketed directly into Naruto's stomach. Naruto hit the ground with a loud bang, getting the air knocked out of him as he felt his chakra system start to fail. Like it was getting blocked off from a fighting force. Coughing again, he looked up to his father, who stood tall above him with Natsu directly on his right, wearing the smuggest grin Naruto had even seen. You're right, Danzo. He can't be trusted. Minato sneered, signaling both Danzo and Hiashi to step forward. Both doing so without hesitation, the latter even having a sinister grin plastered onto his face. Minato's eyes never left Naruto's as Hiashi grabbed a hold of his son. No, a hold of Naruto. Take him to the highest graded cell we have. I want you to keep watch over him until I get there. Danzo, accompany him. I would like to speak with you then. Of course, Hokage-sama, both replied simultaneously. Naruto let himself get pulled up from the ground by the Hyuga elder, unable to wipe his blood-stricken mouth as a wide grin grew on his face, making Hiashi even angrier. What are you grinning at, brat? Hiashi roared, bending Naruto's arms further apart. Naruto spat at the elder, blood and saliva flying onto Hiashi's pristine white coat. Hiashi looked pissed beyond belief, hearing an audible snap in Hiashi's body as he headbutted the blonde. Naruto's head flew back in pain, the onlookers watching in complete silence as Naruto lifted his head again, showing off his blood-stained teeth with a vengeance as he laughed out loud again. They started to increase in volume, only stopping for a few seconds as Hiashi kneed Naruto in the gut. You fools! You really think I didn't have a plan? Naruto screamed, more blood flying from his mouth and scattering itself on Hiashi. Minato and Natsu watched Naruto in slight shock, watching as Naruto convulsed around in Hiashi's death grip, like he was trying to break free from a straitjacket as he laughed like he was finally driven into lunacy. It's only a matter of time before Konoha pays for what they did to me. These past 5 months I've been in cahoots with a Wagakur. They're on their way here now, to completely level this whole village. I Wagakur. Minato yelled loudly, his face growing even more pale as Naruto grinned evilly as he felt himself getting pulled away by Hiashi with Danzo right on their tail. That's right. The Tsuchikage-sama offered me everything if we could kill all of you. He's been more of a father to me than you asshole. Anbu. Gather all the Junin you can and separate them into squads. Have the Chunin in the village patrol the perimeter to see if there is an attack coming from any direction. Minato yelled, as 5 Anbu agents jumped from the ceiling and landed in front of him before leaving to go and fulfill their orders. It's too late. Iwa should be here already. And get this damned kid out of here already. Interrogate him when you get the chance. Minato said, glaring deeply at Naruto. In any way you see fit. Hiashi and Danzo grinned darkly, slapping Naruto across the face, drawing even more blood to leak down Naruto's lip. T2-san. Natsu said, grabbing his father's attention as Minato was now speaking to the rest of the clan heads, giving them all orders in quick succession. Miyanot turned to look at his son. Natsu's eyes were now a bright gold in color, a dash replacing his pupil as dark orange accents highlighted the outside of his eyelids like thick mascara. I sense 2 insanely strong chakra signatures heading this way. There. Boom. Natsu and Minato shielded their faces as a large gust of wind reached them. The wall across from them had been smashed open, throwing small stones and pebbles to them as their clothes fluttered thanks to the harsh breeze. Minato could hear the distant sound of screams reach his ears outside the walls. Focusing his chakra and widening his eyes as he turned around, noticing that Hiashi, Danzo and his son were now gone. Well, Minato Namikaze, and the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. It seems we reached our destination. Kiss 'em, a deep voice said, drawing both Namikaze's attention upwards as the gust of wind finally died down, allowing them to see as they stared deep into bright purple eyes residing in a bright orange-headed male that stood menacingly in front of them. Kiss 'em grinned, nodding his head along with his leader as he bounced Samehada on his shoulder. Of course, I'll leave the blonde cage to you while I go after the kid. I'll make sure to take his beast. Just like I'd done to his precious little brother. Kiss 'em spoke. Natsu growled, channeling more sage chakra into him as the pigment around his eyes grew darker, into a deep shade of red. Without looking back at his father he spoke. "2-san, I don't think this is part of Naruto's plan." Minato nodded, eyeing the orange-headed stranger with anger as he pulled out one of his famous 3-pronged kunai, twirling it in his palm. "I agree. Make sure you kill that blue-skinned bastard." "Of course, 2-san." Natsu replied, jumping out of the building with inhuman speed. Kiss 'em just grinned, vanishing from his spot as he gave chase to the red-headed kid. Minato breathed in heavily, shifting his stance as he raised his kunai upwards. He had given strict orders to Shikaku to lead the shinobi in any way he seemed fit depending on the situation. There was no one else he would ever entrust with something this important. He was a tactical and military genius and would surely help lead the great Konoha into another victory. Knowing that his village was safe with his top shinobi handling it, he eyed the unmoving stranger in front of him. Looking into those deep purple eyes that looked eerily familiar, like he had seen them in a history book before. The orange-headed man took an intimidating step forward, his eyes unblinking as his black and red coat became perfectly visible for the cage to see. "And what does the leader of the Akatsuki think he's doing infiltrating the strongest ninja village in the elemental nations?" Minato challenged, ILY swinging another kunai out from his pouch with his free hand. The orange-headed man stood still, not even shaking his head as the purple eyes narrowed. "We are here to capture the 2 Kyuubi Jinchuriki in the village," he said, outstretching both of his arms forward. A swell of chakra started to pulse around him, making Minato's go wide at the sheer denseness of the chakra. Feeling the air shift around both males like it was climbing over them. The wall started to crack from the pressure, small pebbles getting picked up as the gust of wind picked up its speed to unbearable levels, forcing Minato to squint so he wouldn't lose his vision. The world shall know pain. Almighty push. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.